Good evening to everyone who is with us tonight, whether you are watching us on the live stream or a member of the Community Task Force on Policing's Subcommittee on the Allocation of Police Resources. I'm Larry Schooler, a member of our facilitation team, and it's really great to be able to convene this subcommittee for the first time. This is one of 4 subcommittees that'll be getting underway either tonight, next Monday night, or next Tuesday night. Later tonight, we'll be hearing from a committee that has a very long name that includes training and hiring and retention and promotion and the like. And next week, I know we'll be dealing with racial and other disparities on Monday night and the Civilian Review Board on Tuesday night. So we invite you to join us for as many of those as you would like to. In just a moment, I'm going to share my screen and put up a draft agenda for our get-together for this evening. We are planning to just go for an hour because we have a second subcommittee scheduled to start at 6, and I know at least a couple of our members in this subcommittee are also members of that one, and we want to try to accommodate them as best as possible. So in a moment, you should see up on the screen a meeting agenda. So if I could get a thumbs up that folks could see that, that would be great. Very good. So what we're trying to do tonight is kind of solidify a couple of things. One are our goals as a subcommittee. 2 are key pieces of information needed for our deliberations. And 3, the existing way that we see resources being allocated. I want to note that Chief Lally prepared some materials that we will be able to walk through some of tonight, and I know Chief's with us. We apologize that we weren't able to distribute those materials before the meeting began tonight. This is obviously a little bit of a strange week for many of us in terms of getting back from the holidays, but I know Chief is making herself available to help with any and all questions that the subcommittee has. And so as we go, we'll either be referencing written materials that she submitted to us or asking for her to fill in. So Chief, thank you for providing that info, and sorry we couldn't get it distributed before the meeting started. The discussion agreements that we've used throughout the task force process are here and are identical to what we've done in the full task force meetings, obviously just hoping for folks to, be respectful, candid, and constructive, give everyone opportunities to speak and look for common ground and the like. So those are there for your benefit. In just a minute, we will check with Task Force Member Blanchard to see if anyone is at City Hall that wants to address the subcommittee. Then we're going to do an exercise where we hear a little bit more about each person's interest in the subcommittee's work and their direct experience with the topic. Then we want to sort of discuss and iron out scope of work for this subcommittee and learn and make sure we understand and inventory what each member wants to understand better. We probably will not need a break. We'll probably blow right through that, but we will go through some of the requests for information that have already been delineated in our task force meeting on December 16th and some of the chief's responses to those, as well as additional requests for information and key questions for the subcommittee to answer. So there is a lot here, but we're hoping that within the next hour we can get to a place where we know where we're headed and can, get directly started with the work even tonight as we go. Are there any questions or suggestions for changes to the agenda before we get underway? Great. I want to also acknowledge Sheila Brown, who's with us to take notes. My colleague Sarah Omar is here for additional support. So Task Force Member Blanchard, first of all, thank you for going out in the sub 20-degree weather to get to City Hall. And could I just know if there's any member of the public there who wanted to speak to us?
No, no one is present.
All right, well, thank you very much. For the public's benefit, we are in the process not just of having public comment available during these meetings, but developing a schedule for meetings that will be intended specifically for community input. So stay tuned to the website and to the City of Elgin for additional information as we have it for opportunities later in the year for community input writ large. All right. So as you see on the agenda, what I wanted to do here initially was give committee members a chance to kind of explain a little bit more about what motivated you to join this subcommittee, and then also do a little bit of storytelling. Because I think that it's very easy in a group like this to get caught up in sort of policy deliberations. But I think for each member of this subcommittee and the task force, there are personal experiences that inform what has brought you here. And so we want to understand some of that and allow folks to benefit from your experience as we begin this subcommittee's work. So I would love a volunteer to agree to take this on first, and we'll just kind of get through the subcommittee on a volunteer basis, unless we have a lot of shy folks. But this group, based on my work with you so far, is not that. So I'm going to stop share. I'll refresh your memory if need be in terms of the questions, but essentially what made you join the subcommittee, and what are some of the direct experiences you've had with how the Elgin Police Department allocates resources that informs your service on this subcommittee. So I would love for a volunteer to be our first respondent.
I'll volunteer if you don't mind.
Task Force Member Callum, great to see you. Go ahead.
I think my interest lies in the fact that numbers don't lie. They can be manipulated, they can be twisted, but for the most part, they don't lie. And that's a belief that I came to from my father, who was a brilliant amateur mathematician. Words, he always said, could be manipulated, but numbers, you couldn't. And I enjoy following where the money goes, and it really speaks to where your priorities are. Just look at your own household. Is your priority, feeding your family? Is it feeding your car? Is it paying your mortgage? Is it travel? Is it buying expensive clothing? Whatever your interests or your needs or priorities are, you're going to need the money. And certainly it's at the heart of so many things that we do in daily life. Frankly, you need money to be able to do whatever it is you want to do. And lack of money, poverty lies at the heart of so many issues. So with that in mind, where does the Elgin Police Department put its money? Is it in training? Is it in equipment? Is it in community engagement? I honestly don't know the answer, but I'm excited and interested in learning. And do I have my own inclinations as to where I would like to see funding go? Yes, I will be very upfront about that. And I believe that community engagement and first responder training in terms of mental health crisis really is at the heart of where a police department can move forward in caring for the community. So that's my interest in being on this committee.
It's really helpful to hear that. And I wonder if I can just probe a little bit further and ask if there is sort of an example you could share of a time where this really came into sharp focus for you, where you had an experience with an officer, or you knew of a family member in crisis, or a friend or something, where this need and this priority became more apparent to you.
I serve on the board of Family Service Association of the Greater Elgin area, and they are very much interested in working with police departments. They actually have social workers embedded at the Aurora Police Department. And the idea is that if you have a medical emergency, you call 911, they send out the fire department. They are trained to respond to medical emergencies. When someone is having a mental crisis and you call 911, in the old days, that person would just be arrested. It would not be treated as a health issue. And when the Elgin Police Department started to get into, first of all, requiring that all the officers get the crisis intervention training, I really saw that as a positive step in helping our community. I think a lot of people who wind up being arrested because of a mental situation, they're not criminals. They're not committing a crime. They need help. If somebody is having a heart attack, you call 911 and the paramedics take care of you. If you are experiencing a dissociative break with reality and you call 911, the police come out and you don't get any help. You wind up, being arrested and you face criminal charges.
Sure.
So I'm really happy to see this direction that modern policing is taking, where mental health issues are being addressed as health and well-being issues and not crimes. And there's a history of mental illness in my family, so that's my personal interest in the subject. And I do community engagement as my work and my professional life. And I really think that the key to really enriching everybody's lives is building stronger community. And we do that, through health, wellness, financial well-being, stability. And the police can play a huge role in that, as well as our other community entities. And I'm just happy to see, all of you here, because this is the key. It's working together.
I just want to acknowledge the courage it takes to talk about some of these topics, and I appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable in a public meeting like that. So thank you for giving us that context. I really appreciate it. All right, who's next?
I'll go next, Larry.
Thank you, Task Force Member Blanchard, please.
Yes. Well, I want to be a part of this committee because I'm a part of the training subcommittee as well. And I would like to see where the funds are allocated when it comes to training. Where we invest in, where the city investing its money in the training. In my professional life, I run a home delivery department for a major corporation. So I have experience with budgeting money, making sure money goes where it's supposed to go. So I would feel like I can bring that to the table.
And so was there a time in your lived experience where you thought, gee, I wonder if they're putting enough money into X kind of training, or I feel like they're, spending too much on Y, or, just any kind of data point that informs your interest in the topic?
Well, that's my interest. I want to see, and find out more where the money is allocated, where it's going. Could we invest more into training to curtail some of the being tested Tish was talking about, whether they're treated as a criminal act, whether it's a mental act.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that perspective. Appreciate it.
I can go next, Larry.
Task Force Member Ariola, good to see you.
Good to see you, Larry. So why am I interested in joining this subcommittee? Frankly, my purpose currently lies in redirecting funds from the police to community services. I think similar to what Tish was mentioning, a huge focus on mental health. And one of the main motivators is that I've seen Black and Brown communities not being aided by this, by all of the funds that are allocated towards the police. It's just not a target use of their resources. Black and Brown communities, immigrant communities, communities experiencing homelessness. So my mission lies in redirecting some of those funds that the police is using in affordable housing, substance use prevention, injury prevention, Spanish services, things like that. I have a vocational certificate in law enforcement from ECC, but for many reasons, I did not decide to pursue anything in that realm. But I am inclined in the arts, and I'm an educator, so I'm more community-based than more policy-based, I guess. So I'm here to share experiences and learn from you all, and hopefully vote and make recommendations in the right direction.
And apologies if I begin to sound like a broken record, but to follow up on what you were saying, is there a time where a friend, a family member, a student, a colleague had an experience that made you think something needs to change?
I think the common story is the prejudice in police. Our communities of color don't feel secure. I've been extremely privileged to not have that be a case where I'm in danger. But I've experienced fellow friends, classmates that don't feel safe. And they frankly just don't trust the police. I know it's an entity that we've lived with our entire lives, wanting to trust, wanting to call. But frankly, it may not be the most appropriate of entities to address the things that we need addressing, being mental health, on and on.
How does the distrust manifest itself? Meaning, is it a matter of them choosing to not contact police in a circumstance where others might contact them, or they do contact them and their experience, it for whatever reason leads them down that path? How does that distrust come out, do you think?
I think unfortunately the call to a call to 911 can be weaponized. If a person of color is caught in between, they risk just being in the line of fire, as opposed to what a white fellow may be experiencing, which we've all seen portrayed in current events. So a call is not, what's another way to say this? So it's just not the way to do it. It's possible that a person of color can be in the line of fire because of escalation and things like that, of prejudice in police. We've seen cases where mental health calls go wrong in a front lawn or things like that. So those experiences have really sat with those communities, and on. That narrative just continues to be, and I think it's traumatic to these communities, to say the least.
So is it fair to say that either people you know or know of have had an experience where they called for police assistance and something didn't work out the way they...
It's actually that they don't call because they know that there's potential for risk.
So in an emergent situation,
yes,
there are people you know who choose not to call out of a fear of the consequences. Do I have that right? Okay.
Yes.
Really appreciate you sharing. Thanks. Councilmember Powell, good to see you. Task force. Did you want to go first? Go ahead, Councilmember.
Actually, I did want to add something because I've had some folks approach me regarding this issue and some questions that they had. And just for everyone's benefit, I believe the budget, if it's not already in the shared drive, probably soon will be. The vast majority of the city's budget as a whole, but the police budget in particular, is for personnel. We don't make widgets at the city. We provide services, and we provide those services obviously with people, and that comprises a very large majority of the budget. So when you talk about the allocation of resources, you really can't have that discussion without talking about the allocation of personnel. The question that has come up is we've had quite a few folks retire over the past couple of years, just based on when they were hired. They're at that point in their career where they can retire. And believe we've hired a lot of those folks back on a 1-for-1 basis. Yet we are at a 40, 50-year low in our crime rates here in our community. So the question has been raised, at what point, if we're at a 40, 50-year crime rate low, do we still need the number of officers that we have? And how do we determine how many officers we need? So I think that has to be a core part of the discussion, because the majority of the budget is indeed personnel.
Fair enough. Appreciate that, Councilmember. Thanks. Task Force Member Rivera, I saw your hand, please.
Yes, thank you, Larry. I agree with Tish when about the money. The money reveals what's in the heart, and the heart of the community, the heart of the motives of the police department. The experience that I've had over 20 years ago, I was a 911 dispatcher for another municipality, and I was able to see the firsthand calls that come in, whether it's domestic violence, homicide, rape. There's so many other, when you hear what's happening firsthand and the experience there compared to what Elgin's doing now is just leaps and bounds of a difference. The social service that's provided from the mental health, the social workers that are in place at the police department after, like, say, for instance, a domestic violence incident that happens, the follow-up that is in place now didn't exist, even 20 years ago. The community engagement programs, not only with mental health, but senior services, shop with a cop, coffee with a cop, all the different programs that happen now did not exist previously. The kids summer program outreach is something that I'm very interested in, especially with the allocation of resources. I'm a firm believer in reaching and mentoring very young, and I believe that that is something that could really make a difference in someone's life. I've also seen that a different side of what Councilmember Areola had experienced, that people are comfortable calling, that they do receive the help that they need. I know of someone firsthand that there was an incident with domestic violence, the police were called, they went through the whole process. And the police officer who's no longer with the police force, he became like an officer at the school, I think Kimball, he had since passed away, but he would even follow up with this individual after the fact to make sure that everything, 3 years later, after the arrest was made, he would make a point to reach out. How's everything going? Is everything okay? Did your life change? What took place? And that's something that's not in a budget, but it still reveals the police doing their job outside of the 9 to 5 or whatever their shift is. So I've had just a different experience with, the police, and as far as just seeing both sides of it. So yeah, I just want to see where the allocation, where it's happening now. Also retirement packages, like what's all at play here. And like Councilmember Powell mentioned, we need to see the numbers, see where everything's going. But I'm impressed with what's happened so far with the allocation. Once we have all the information and everything on the table, then I'm sure we can make more, decisions. But I like what's happened just within the last 20 years of what Elgin Police has done.
I think Task Force members Rivera and Areola's comments are kind of revealing the benefits of putting this task force together, crediting Council members Powell and Shaw and others that we can have these diverse perspectives at the same table. So it's great to have that direct history. I didn't know Task Force member Rivera about your dispatch history. That's really interesting. So thank you. I see Task Force member Flickema, and just want to note that we also have Task Force member Brockaway and Zaldivar, and I think that those are the only two left to speak. Task Force member Haben is joining us just to observe. Task Force member Flickema.
Yeah, I just thought it would be a good time for me to jump in following some of those comments in relation to why this was an interesting task force, or subcommittee for me. And really going back to the concept of personnel, looking at what is the, what are our resources? How do we want to hire using those resources? Who do we want to hire? And for me, in the line of work that I do, I work in a arena where I supervise a team, and I have directly responded to after-hours calls at a university, and have both partnered with the Elgin Police as well directly with mental health professionals in responding to mental health crises. And I think that there's a really big difference between somebody who has gotten 4 years, 6 years, 8 years of training in mental health care, in mental health treatment, in mental health crisis and response, and somebody who is trained on the police force. And that's not meant to be a criticism, it's just a fact. that when you have that much training, the response that you're going to be able to deliver, the actions that you're going to be able to deliver are just going to be really nuanced and different. I haven't had any overtly negative experiences with members of the Elgin Police who've responded to calls that we've called them for. Just different and maybe not as effective or as in-depth and helpful as when we've had the opportunity to have somebody maybe during office hours or in a time when we were able to call a mental health professional to come de-escalate and help advise on what next steps were. And so looking at that as a really tangible example of resources and of how resources are allocated, and even looking at hiring and who the Elgin Police might choose to hire, what kinds of positions, I'd love to be able to speak into that on this subcommittee. I manage budgets in my line of work, and I hire people in my line of work. And I train people, which is also why I'm on the training and the very long name subcommittee.
The subcommittee formerly known as.
Yeah, we need to abbreviate it or something.
We'll get an acronym.
All right, let's do it.
Well,
yeah, and so
yeah, go ahead.
So that's really just what my motivation is. I'm really interested in exploring more of that and exploring some ways that the Elgin Police Department can really look at reallocating some of those funds, or even maybe even releasing some of those funds to other entities that could act as partners who would be more capable of responding to some of those things and providing better services. So
really appreciate the firsthand experience that you're bringing, and it's also helpful to hear that the police have worked, hand in hand with some of the folks that you work with. And I know, I'm sure Chief Lally likes to, hear that as well. So thank you for giving us all that perspective, Aubrey.
Yep, you're welcome.
So that leaves us with Task Force members Brockway and Zaldivar. I think it's Task Force member Zaldivar who is kind of responsible for the creation of this subcommittee in terms of having the original suggestion, but either he or Task Force member Brockway can go next.
I'll go, I guess. Thanks for shouting me out. Yeah, so, I was a software engineer before I really dabbled into all of this. So I'm more of a science-oriented guy. I do a lot of numbers work. I started doing this because of my personal experiences. I really wasn't like what you call politically woke, like at all, like just a couple of years back. And I quit my job, and this is because I was in California at the time, and I lived by the border. So at the border, I saw things that that you would think makes a department better or a place better, but it was just so weird. It was so weird seeing people of color, like, hurting other people of color, which is something I don't usually see from my experience. But anyways, to me, it just makes sense to look into this, because after studying more than probably 10 major city department budgets, and even looking at our own budget, warning that if we continue to increase the size of our police department, that we may not have the funds to pay for things and services that we provide to such departments. So I think it's just a natural thing to do at this moment, that we're questioning what we're really doing and how that affects policy making in our society as a whole. So I really just want to put to question, because historically police department budgets have never decreased. And so let's look at the science, let's look at the statistics, let's look at how that impacts and what's being said versus what's being done. And really, this is the reason why I wanted to open this up. So regardless of people who have different point of views, I'm pretty sure everyone already knows what I support. I think their ideas and their methodologies and their input will reveal different things that are occurring, right, and questions. So I really was interested in establishing this kind of subcommittee, because I needed help. This was a project that I've been working on all summer. I came downtown because I know that the police department was questioning the size of the department, and so was I, right? And I got a whole bunch of people I brought to city council to voice their concerns, because we know it's 2022. We know what these concerns are, and this is why I'm here. So and yeah, personal experiences. I've been stopped. I'm a colored man. I've been stopped by the police. I've been pulled out of my car for no apparent reason, and then they justify it saying like it's the middle of the night and we think there's drug traffickers. And I've been in school when I was in high school. I've been interrogated by policemen. I've been called a terrorist sometimes. Like things like that. A friend of mine actually just like a couple months ago was pulled over by a EPD policeman, and he was in his car. Whatever happened occurred, right? But at the end of the day, they suggested to be in the program. This person was really spooked, and I'm talking about like whatever the help program that's occurring right now with the police department and I guess the mental health response team, and they questioned the female in the car, if she needed the services, but not like my friend who was the guy who was the one that was really being interrogated and pulled out of the car for no apparent reason. And I'm not going to go into the details because hearsay. But however, it's like, will these new programs lead to an increase in stoppages and people like unwarranted stops? You know what I mean? Like there's a cause and effect for everything. So
yeah. So part of what I hear you saying there is that you want to understand the way that particular allocations are tracked in terms of the effectiveness that they're having on whatever the particular metric is that they're trying to address. So, if there are resources being put in a particular direction, how are we seeing the results of that, or what are the fruits of that labor? So yeah, no, appreciate all of that, and I know it takes guts to talk about something that was difficult. So thank you for doing so. A lot there, appreciate it. Turn to Task Force Member Brockway, I think, for the last of these intros, and then we'll move on.
A lot of what everyone just said. I work in church life, and so I coach congregations and church leaders and tell them whatever your budget is, that reflects your value, where you're going to put your money. And I think that's an important thing that comes out. I'm a part of the Church of the Brethren, which is a historic peace church. And so my entry into these conversations has been around militarism. And we know that, also as a trained historian, I can tell you that the militarization of the police forces has increased the budget over time, right? The war on crime, quote unquote, has militarized our policing to the point where to me, it's dramatically problematic. And that the number of places where we're seeing force used is a direct result of that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, before you continue, I want to make sure everybody knows what militarization means in your reading of it, because I think it's subject to interpretation. So tell us kind of how you define that.
The example that I would use about it is looking at the equipment and the style of training that the police use, right? That the baseline for policing is force, right? And so what equipment and training is being used, even to address all of these other concerns that we've raised, whether that's race or whatever, that its main approach to things, its tool in the toolbox per se, is the use of force. And so weaponry, body armor, vehicles, even down to clothing, begin to represent that kind of posture, that engagement. And so I come back and say, well, where are the values? And, a number of these things like mental health, domestic violence, race, the funds in the community, right? Like we know that crime rates are related to the amount of dollars that go back into the community, right? And so is it really necessary? I mean, I hear Councilmember Powell's reminder that, you know, a big chunk of this is personnel, right? That's exactly right. Now, what are our personnel receiving in terms of their training and their equipment to reflect the variety of needs that we see in our community, rather than approaching it primarily with force?
Really helpful. And I guess just repeating a question I've asked a few folks, is there a particular personal experience you wanted to share where you kind of had a little bit of an aha moment? This is something you wanted to tackle more deeply.
Not necessarily directly personal, and especially not even with EPD per se. I mean, it goes way back. You know, I'm a transplant to the city. But I can say that the number of times where we've called at my house for persons that we thought needed attention, I was nervous calling the police as to what's going to be the response, right? A person that had clearly some mental deficits, what was going to be the best response? And they have been amazingly professional, but I also recognize that I stood there and maintained a pretty close presence just so that in case things did escalate, or even just, I recognize that the symbolism of my white male body changes the dynamics of a situation whenever it happens. So staying close by, just recognizing that gut feeling.
Sorry, my internet connection froze there for a minute. If I wasn't responsive, that's why. But thank you for, no, I really appreciate the candid share there. And also the from is really meaningful. And I look like I am frozen again. So I'm gonna try to exit out of some applications. Y'all bear with me. Can everybody hear me still?
Yes, and you're not frozen, Larry.
Oh, okay. Thought I was. Well, what a tremendous amount of great sharing. And thank you for everyone's share. I want to make a couple of observations based on what I heard. One is to state the obvious. You know, a lot of what we're sharing in this subcommittee cuts across multiple other subcommittees that this group has set up. So of course we have training that's going to meet next hour. There also could be conversations related to mental health that may come up in other subcommittees, including we heard a lot in this initial share about maybe disparities in response, and that could come up in Monday night's subcommittee that deals with disparities. And so what I want to suggest is that this subcommittee, rather than sort of looking at the particulars of how an officer is trained, look at the ways in which monies are being invested, both in particular types of training, perhaps, but also, the things that have been alluded to here: tactics, equipment, size of the police, other sort of discrete expenditures. And then of course, we heard from Councilmember Powell and others, just the whole notion of thinking about what this community needs of a police force, whether it's in numbers of officers or types of personnel that are hired, or kind of the for lack of a better way of putting it, the scope of work, if you will, for the department. I want to just make folks aware that because mental health came up a number of times, Chief Lally has given us to share with you all, and it's in the box folder now, a number of pieces of data that relate to mental health, some of which I'll probably ask her to talk about a little bit here, and certainly in subsequent meetings. But because of how much interest there is within the subcommittee on the way in which mental health crises are addressed, I know that the chief has a lot of information, including the 40-hour crisis intervention training, which might come up next hour, the Collaborative Crisis Services Unit, CCSU, the co-response model with a mental health professional and a police officer, and so forth. So a lot of information to go through there, just for everybody's edification. One thing I want to do now, let's see, I'm checking my time. We have about 20 minutes left in tonight's allotted time, so that we don't bleed into the next meeting. I want to just turn our attention briefly to the to the ordinance that created the task force, so that we make sure that we are kind of aligning the subcommittee's work with the way that the ordinance sets things out. And let me see if I can zoom in a bit. So here it says powers and duties, and it references assessing effectiveness of methods employed to engage the community, identifying opportunities to improve police culture, ensuring accountability and restoring community trust, particularly within communities of color, which did come up in a few folks' comments. There are references to peer cities, how EPD is being used in the community, which I think, plays a little bit into the mental health conversation we were just having, identifying which services being provided are working well and which services may be better accomplished by others. And then I think others of these may better fit into other subcommittees, like the training subcommittee, the personnel management that has hiring and promotion that's grouped with training. Disparities has its own committee. Adequacy of current staffing status, equipment requirements that I think could play into this subcommittee. And that I think about covers it. So wanted to give the public and the subcommittee just access to this. It's of course in the box folder and available publicly, but wanted to make sure that we are aligning this subcommittee's work with what's specifically asked of you all. And I think we've done so. Chief, if you're there, I want to, if it's okay with you, I'd like to share with the group some of the material that you provided, and I wanted to see whether you'd rather talk about some of what you sent us in writing, or whether you'd rather share some of the materials in writing on screen, or ask that the subcommittee look at it later. So, Chief, if you're there, I just wanted to see how you'd like us to handle sharing some of the work you've already done for the inquiries that this body has.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Good evening, everyone. So the information that was provided, there's a lot in there, and it was taken from the meeting that you guys had where there were some questions. So there is a robust, information about specifically mental health and some of the other issues you guys are bringing up. But I will just really hit on a couple of things real quick, just based on some of the comments. So especially when it comes to mental health, I've been a police officer. I'll start my 27th year in March, and all my time has been here in Elgin. And I share that with you guys too, just, so you can kind of understand the perspective of, I have seen the evolution of policing as a specific to the Elgin Police Department. And, the officers that we hire today and what's required in training, it's very different than when I went to the police academy. And, when we talk about, what the Elgin Police Department does today, as opposed to 5 years ago, we are always constantly learning and evolving. And, and one of those things I can tell you was the creation of our Collaborative Crisis Services Unit. And, that was something that came from trips that we did, and going to Scotland and London and New York, and looking at de-escalation and mental health. And our response, we currently do contract with the Ecker Center. So there are funds allocated towards an outside entity for mental health professionals. And we also understand, I think it might have been Aubrey who said, there's a difference in someone that goes to 4, 6, or 8 years of training in mental health and a police officer. Totally agree. And I also know that the partnership between when an officer shows up to a call where someone is in a mental health or some type of emotionally distressed situation, everybody has their roles. And I can tell you that one of the resources that I shared with you guys is a video that shows how CCSU works along with our emergency services detail, and how everybody comes together in their roles to have a peaceful resolve, because that is the goal of the Elgin Police Department. And and we're not many police departments have units like that. It is coming, we receive a lot of calls. People have come to visit us to see how we do what we do. And that's a credit to not just the police department, but I think to our community. And, so being able to share some of what we do, and there's some news articles, There's a video. We were actually highlighted in a Police Chief magazine, which is a international magazine that highlighted what we do. So there's a lot of good that's coming. But as I've said since the very beginning, I think what makes us so open to we listen to the criticism and we push ourselves to be better. So everything that was said today, is obviously taken to heart and hearing some of the things that we do. But we are doing a lot, and I would encourage everybody just to kind of go through the resources that I shared, so that you guys can be familiar with a lot of the things that you've asked are kind of there for you. And then second to that, really quick too, and I think we could probably try to, as your committee progresses, but providing you some the numbers, because I heard a lot about the budget and the numbers. We can absolutely do that. As Councilwoman Powell said, vast majority of our budget, a significant, if not most of our budget, is to people. And the people, especially, it's an organization that we're tied to unions. And it's not just police officers, right? So when you look at the police budget, you're not just looking at police officers. We have dispatchers, we have civilian personnel who are not police officers. We have a telecommunications center, we have a records division, we have a traffic parking control officer. So it's not just all that money is not just police officers.
Right.
But I will tell you too that, with me being here for, starting my 27th year in March, and at the time when I got hired, we had more officers at one point than we do now. And, equating the crime rate going down, and, a lot of that is Elgin 26 years ago was very different, and the community was very different. And I've been here, and I can tell you that a lot of the community initiatives and programs that we've done is why you see that crime rate go down. And you can see it. You can see it in the data where there's a spike where we implement some of these community engagement programs, and you start seeing these relationships that we're building with our community, so that people come forward for crime, so that people feel comfortable with us. And additionally, the types of calls that we go on today are much, much different than many years ago. So just as an example, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, was everyone walking around with cell phones, video evidence, cameras. A lot of our calls, there is always a technical component to it. We have to do forensic analysis on phones. That takes a lot of time. Calls that we go on where people are emotionally distressed, those calls can take hours. And so, the people, and when those calls are going on, we're still answering other calls for service. So, there's a lot, I could probably talk for like 3 hours to you guys. There's a lot of information. And I'm more than happy to provide, I already started giving you guys some information. Larry, if you want to give me a list, then we can provide that. But I also just want to make sure that you guys are getting some of the kind of the real life. This is what's going on outside of reading paper. Here are things that actually occur, and this is how they occur. So more than happy to be here and be a resource to you guys.
Really appreciate that, Chief. And before I go back to the subcommittee for a minute, there was a couple of folks who mentioned just this idea of the overall size of the force and, relationships between, crime rates and, number of officers. And I guess one thing that might be helpful, and it may be something that needs some research, is understanding how decisions are made about the size that the force should be, whether there are national benchmarks, whether it's tied to crime rates, and statistics associated with where some hotspots might be, because I think that might be very illuminating to folks, just to understand why you have the number of officers and non-sworn personnel that you have. The other thing I was just going to mention to the subcommittee, the chief made reference to the union contract. We do have a copy of the most recently ratified, approved, I don't know the right word for it, approved union contract uploaded into the box folder. As the chief indicated, that's certainly a significant part of how a budget gets done, is negotiation with the union that represents officers. So that's there for your reference. But we're also going to work the chief just to have the budget of the department available so that people can understand and see that. But as the chief mentioned, there are a number of resources that we will that are available to you as of now, that go into some depth, including the articles and video that the chief alluded to, that explain a little bit about how the department currently addresses mental health issues, as well as some of the equipment purchases and so on. I want to ask a couple of clarifying questions to the subcommittee. I want to be cognizant of the time, but I also want to, I know that there were a couple of questions that the chief, I think, was trying to answer and needed more information. And so I want to come to those. There was a question asked during the December 16th meeting that, at least in our notes, said, can changes be made without an increase to the police budget? Any recommendations? So I don't know if there was anybody on the subcommittee tonight that raised that question, but if there's any clarification we can have to that, that would be helpful. Can changes be made without an increase to the police budget? Any recommendations? There also was a question, is there a list of any jobs that have been resolved due to budget restraints, new jobs that have been created, and what are the reasons? We may have just not gotten that correct in terms of what the actual question was, but we wanted some clarification on what the person asking that question was going for there. Is there a list of any jobs perhaps that have been reduced due to budget constraints, or new jobs that have been created, and what are the reasons? So if anybody who had that question could clarify it, it can be offline, but we just want to make sure that that we get that clarified. So I'll pause there and see if anybody wants to add any context to those two questions for the chief's benefit. Task Force Member Zaldivar, please.
So I had the first question, and it wasn't really a question, but it was more of a statement that I said that I wanted to make recommendations that don't involve increasing the budget. And
Got it.
I say this because historically speaking, and even now that we see with nurses and Corona, right? We see different sectors of our society that either take budget cuts, take employment cuts. I remember growing up at Huff School Elementary School, my teachers were always panicking. I remember this. I don't know why. They were panicking because teachers were being cut, right? And that's just a policy decision that's being made at a very important part of our sector. And I've never, again, there's just no history of there's just infinite growth. That's the history of the police department, infinite growth. Where does it stop? We don't know yet. Where does, I get that police receive more training or need more training, but we're basically evolving the police department into other jobs and other sectors of society. So things continue to intertwine.
Yeah. So what you're driving for is not a question of Chief Lawley so much as a question for the subcommittee to ponder relative to how changes could be made that don't require an increase in funding.
Correct. And by no means I want to clarify, by no means does this, I believe that the size of the department equals success. I believe the efficiency of a department equals success. And when I'm saying that, we should make policies that don't increase the budget, it's not an attack to the police department. It's a question to how we do policy. And it's just as simple as that.
Sure.
I think you can be a great officer. I think you can be a great department, no matter what the size is. But when we start making policies without questioning it, that's where my whole stance lies.
I understand. Thank you very much. That's actually a very helpful clarification, just so that we can make sure we're being responsive to task force member requests for information. In the time we have remaining, I just want to ask if the members of the subcommittee, as you've listened tonight, if you've thought of any other information that I haven't enumerated already, that we haven't chatted about already, that you want to make sure is obtained for you before we meet next to inform your work. And I'm going to ask that we try to keep this just to a couple of minutes of conversation. Certainly we can follow up on email with other requests, but I want to just be sensitive to the next committee's start time. If you've joined us for the training subcommittee, that will start on this channel here shortly. But let's go to task force members Rivera and Calamar with additional requests for info. Go ahead, task force member Rivera.
Thank you, Larry. Yes, I'd like to know the forecast of what new programs, new community engagement programs, or that will, forecasted for the next like 3 to 5 years. I'd like to know what's planned for the future. That's it.
And Chief Lawley, as you're listening, if you need any clarification, signal that to us just so we can try to get it as we go. Task force member Calamar, and then flick them up.
In my experience preparing budgets at the library, you ask for the moon and then you hope you get a couple of stars thrown in. So I would just like to know, I imagine that you budget for certain things, and perhaps to achieve consensus, you have to take some things out. You have to trim some budget items. Instead of asking for X number of dollars in whatever category, you take that down a bit. So whatever your shadow budget is, like that budget that you would have liked, and where would that have gone? I think that's always interesting. Where are your dreams? Where are the hopes? Where are the priorities? And then, because, to be real, we all have economic constraints. We don't always get what we ask for. So I think it would be interesting to just find out, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do with it? Besides, lavishly partnering with the library.
I was going to say, yeah, the library seems like a good place to put some of that.
Right. Yeah.
As someone who has, I'm embarrassed to say, racked up more library fines than I can count because I'm so addicted to library rental.
We're all fines free now.
Oh, good. Good. Task force member Flickham, I might give you the last word for the moment. Again, we can take additional requests via email as needed, but go ahead.
Yeah, mine is quick. I know, Chief Lally, you mentioned your partnership with Ecker Center, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about specifically what that partnership looks like. If there are any contracts or agreements that come along with that, maybe, I don't know that we can see them, but get some details and hear a little bit about what that partnership looks like. And are there any plans or visions in the future to partner with organizations like Ecker Center in the future, or expand that partnership?
Thank you very much. Chief, just want to check if you needed any clarification on any of the requests that were made.
No, just so that, this is what I have, is that just a 3 to 5 year kind of forecast of new programs and initiatives that the department will be taking on. If I had unlimited money, what would I do with it? And lastly, some information on the Ecker Center, inclusive of an agreement, which we can absolutely share, and just our information or our forecast for partnerships in the future. So I can provide that information at the next meeting or writing. I can work that out with you, Larry, but that's what I have.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Task Member Brockway, maybe a quick addition.
Yeah, is there, and I guess I would ask, it's that contract question, is the number of grant dollars that are accounted for in the budget, right? So how much is the city budget covered, and then where do you find these other grants? Because I know, right, is it the 988 number, the crisis number, involves grants outside or grants from the state?
Yeah, so we do have our social service division is funded by grants. We have some traffic grants, so I can provide all the grant information. 988 is a whole nother, that's something that's supposed to be in place by July of 2022. It's meant to replace the suicide hotline. There's some agencies that have received grants. We have not received grants, but some mental health agencies that have received grants to fund mobile response units that are supposed to partner in a way with the police. So I can send some information on that because it's really complex. That's probably more something where I can send you guys. I'll give Larry some links, and that you guys have that information, and I can answer questions thereafter.
Thank you, Chief. I do see Task Force Member Zaldivar, and I want to respect your hand, but I do need to probably adjourn us shortly thereafter. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just a question. If Lally, could you help us get, I know that there's already data out there on the city of Elgin for the police budgets and stuff. It's just not organized, and I would have to manually do it myself. Because the department already has the data, could I ask if you could reorganize the data in such a way that shows your department or your personnel only in that spreadsheet, and if not, who could be responsible for that?
I think that kind of ties into just a desire for the budget of the police department in a way that can pie chart out, or something, how the expenses are divided up.
But the city has individual wages, so we would also be able to not only see like people and dollars specifically, but also like male to female, like pay rates and stuff like that. So not just an overall view of the budget, but what's actually at the city that's already publicly available. If that could just be rearranged and presented to us in such a way where we can have the data without having to transcribe one by one on a different Excel sheet.
Yeah, that's fine. I can provide some City of Elgin pay plans along with just specific to the police department, how our budget breaks out. Yep, no problem.
Awesome. Thank you.
What I'll endeavor to do, along with the rest of our team, is as resources are able to be uploaded, I'll certainly alert you all. And then after you review the resources, if you have questions that you think might be answerable with additional info that can be uploaded, let's try to do that just for sake of efficiency, because hopefully this subcommittee will meet again shortly, but we want to make maximum use of your meeting time for deliberation rather than information collection. So as I say, we'll notify you. You should get alerts from Box when materials uploaded there, but regardless, we'll send notes out to the subcommittee when new materials are uploaded by the chief of the city. And then when you have clarifying questions, we might try to get those answered with additional written exchanges so that we can use subcommittee time for deliberation. I want to just quickly address the next meeting of this subcommittee. And I'd like to see whether or not it might be possible for us to, whether this might be a consistently good time for folks. Again, I know we asked you about your availability really just for this one meeting, but I wonder perhaps if we could reconvene in 2 weeks at the same time. So it would be Thursday, the 20th at 5 o'clock for the next meeting of this body. I see some thumbs up. Let me switch to gallery view and just see if I could get a kind of show of thumbs. It looks like that works. Is there anybody that wants to share scheduling? Okay, we'll follow up on email, but I think for the public's benefit, we would like to be able to keep subcommittees meeting on a fairly steady, recurring cadence. And so we will tentatively say that we'll reconvene 2 weeks from tonight, but more details will follow. I just wanted to get a sense of the subcommittee's availability before we break. Councilmember Powell, did you want to say anything before we adjourn?
Sure, just real quickly, I just want to bring everyone's attention to a document that is in the shared drive. It's titled TF Concerns for Chiefs Review or something like that. It just basically is a list of a lot of the questions that came out and responses from Chief Lally. Thanks, Chief, for putting that together. There's also several links within that document to presentations, articles, documents. So please take the time to look at that. And there's some also, I think you already covered today, some clarification that's needed on some of the questions.
Yeah.
So if you look through there and you notice that those questions that we're seeking clarification on, like Larry said earlier, are yours, can you please make sure that you clarify what it is you're looking for? But there's a boatload of information there. And I just really urge people to please look at that shared drive folder before the meetings, read the material so that we can come to these meetings prepared to have real discussion, because a lot of the things that are coming up are things that have been talked about for a long time. At the city council level, at public meetings, there's a whole lot of history on a lot of this stuff out there. So just please take the time to look it over.
Appreciate that, Councilmember. And as I say, the facilitation team deserves responsibility for not circulating some of the chief's material before just now based on vacations and so on. So we apologize for that, but it is available now. And the chief will be working, I know, to get some additional resources up as quickly as she can. But major thanks to the chief for providing a tremendous amount of data for this subcommittee's and others' benefits. All right, well, if you are watching us on YouTube, please stand by. We're going to begin shortly the subcommittee on training, hiring, retention, promotion, and I think I'm forgetting a fifth thing. But I want to extend deepest thanks to the members of this subcommittee on the allocation of EPD resources. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you participating so fully and authentically and sharing your lived experience in a public setting. Also want to thank my colleague Sheila Brown for providing notes, which of course will circulate to you all as soon as we can. And the video of this meeting will also be available on the city's homepage for the task force, cityofelgin.org/task force, for anybody who would like to go back and watch. Without further ado, I will say so long, and we will follow up with you on our next meeting, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you.